The stagecoach rolling into Silver Creek carried more than passengers. It carried hope wrapped in uncertainty. Elizabeth Beth Hartwell stepped onto the dusty platform, her simple dress and worn traveling bag speaking of modest means, but her straight shoulders suggesting inner strength that poverty couldn't diminish. At 22, Beth had learned hard lessons. Orphaned at 16, she'd spent 6 years as a seamstress in Chicago, saving every penny for this journey west. The letter in her reticule bore the careful handwriting of Captain Samuel Morrison, a rancher she'd never met but agreed to marry through careful correspondence. Miss Hartwell? A tall, weathered man approached with his hat in hand. Tom Morrison, ma'am. Samuel's father. Welcome to Nevada. Beth shook his hand, immediately liking his warm eyes and firm grip. I'm eager to meet Samuel and see the ranch. Something flickered across Tom's face, a shadow of concern. About that. There are things we need to discuss first. Could we sit somewhere private? A cold knot formed in Beth's stomach. Is Samuel ill? Not ill exactly. Miss Hartwell, my son has been through a great deal since the war ended. He's changed. Over coffee at a small cafe, Tom told her the story. Samuel had served with distinction through the bloodiest battles, Antietam, Gettysburg, the Wilderness. In the final campaign, his regiment was part of a desperate assault that went disastrously wrong. Samuel held the line for 6 hours, lost more than half his company. His body survived, Tom said heavily. His mind? That's harder to say. The doctors call it soldier's heart. There are nights when he doesn't sleep, days when he can't bear people. Sometimes a noise or movement sends him back to that battlefield. Beth sat in silence, absorbing this. The thoughtful rancher from the letters was struggling with wounds no doctor could treat. I need to ask you something, Tom continued. Sam doesn't know you're here. If you're not prepared for a broken man, I'll put you on the next stage east. Beth thought of her own loneliness, her search for belonging. The thought of leaving another broken soul to face demons alone was unbearable. Mr. Morrison, I didn't come looking for an easy life. I came looking for a place where I belonged, where I could make a difference. If Samuel still wants a wife who will stand by him, I'm willing to try. Tom's eyes filled with unshed tears. You understand what you're taking on? Everyone deserves someone who believes in their worth, even when they can't see it themselves. When do I meet my intended husband? The Morrison Ranch sprawled across a valley between red ridges, watered by a year-round creek. The adobe house was larger than expected, with wide porches and carefully positioned windows. But despite the pleasant afternoon, the windows were shuttered, giving the place an air of isolation. Samuel built most of this himself, Tom said with mixed pride and sorrow. Had a real talent for working with his hands. Still does when the mood takes him. Where is he? Probably in the workshop. That's where he goes when things get difficult. Tom helped her down and carried her bag to the porch. Miss Hartwell, there's something else. Sam doesn't know about our recent correspondence. He thinks you changed your mind about coming. Beth's eyes widened. Why? Tom flushed with embarrassment. 3 weeks ago, he had a bad spell. Stayed awake 4 nights, convinced Confederate soldiers were surrounding the house. When it passed, he was so ashamed he wanted to tell you not to come. Said it wouldn't be fair to saddle a decent woman with a husband who couldn't control his own mind. So, you told him I'd change my mind. I thought it would be easier for him to believe you'd rejected him than face the reality of writing that letter himself. They found Samuel in the workshop, bent over a half-finished rocking chair. Even seated, Beth could see he was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and the bearing of a man accustomed to command. His hands moved with careful precision as he shaped the wood, but there was something brittle in his concentration, as though he was holding himself together through sheer will. Sam, Tom said gently, we have a visitor. Samuel looked up, and Beth saw eyes that were older than his 30 years, eyes that had seen too much death, carried too much guilt. When he saw her, confusion flickered across his weathered face. Miss Hartwell. His voice was rough, uncertain. But I thought, Father said, I'm here, Beth said simply, stepping forward. I got your letters and I came. Samuel stood slowly, his movements careful and controlled. Up close, she could see the fine tremor in his hands, the way his eyes darted briefly to the shadows before returning to her face. You shouldn't have come, he said quietly. I'm not the man who wrote those letters anymore, aren't you? Beth studied his face, the intelligence in his eyes, the careful courtesy despite his obvious distress. You look like him to me. You don't understand. Samuel's voice grew strained. I'm broken, Miss Hartwell. Some nights I can't tell the difference between this workshop and a battlefield. Some days I can't bear the sound of voices or the touch of sunlight. You deserve better than a husband who might wake up screaming, thinking you're the enemy. The raw honesty in his admission broke Beth's heart. Here was a man who had given everything in service to his country, and was now convinced his sacrifice had left him unworthy of love or companionship. Captain Morrison, she said, using his military rank deliberately, do you think your men followed you into battle because you were perfect? The question seemed to catch him off guard. No, they followed me because I tried to bring them home safe. And did you succeed? Pain flashed across his face. No. Too many of them died because of my decisions. But some lived because of those same decisions. Beth stepped closer, close enough to see the grief he carried like a physical weight. A broken man doesn't build a ranch like this. A broken man doesn't write letters full of dreams and hope for the future. You're wounded, Samuel, not broken, and wounds can heal. Samuel stared at her for a long moment as though trying to reconcile her presence with his conviction that he was beyond help. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. What if they can't? What if I'm too far gone? Then we'll find out together, Beth replied. If you'll have me. Beth had been at the ranch for 3 days when she witnessed Samuel's first episode. She was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sound, a crash from the workshop, followed by shouting that seemed to come from a different time and place entirely. Hold the line. Don't let them break through. She dropped the wet sheet she'd been hanging and ran toward the workshop, her heart pounding. Through the open door she could see Samuel crouched behind his workbench, his eyes wild and unfocused, staring at something only he could see. Captain Morrison, she called from the doorway, remembering Tom's warning never to approach him suddenly during an episode. Samuel, it's Beth. You're safe. You're home. Can't leave the men, he muttered, his hands shaking as he gripped the edge of the workbench. Got to hold until reinforcements come. Can't let them die. Tom appeared beside her, his face grim with familiarity. It's a bad one. Sometimes they last hours. How do you usually handle it? Wait it out. Try to keep him from hurting himself. There's not much else we can do. But Beth found herself stepping into the workshop despite Tom's restraining hand on her arm. Something in Samuel's voice, the anguish of a man reliving his worst failure, called to her own memories of helplessness and loss. Captain, she said, her voice calm and authoritative, I need you to listen to me. The battle is over. Your men are safe. The reinforcements came. Samuel's head snapped toward her, his eyes struggling to focus. Who are you? You shouldn't be here. It's too dangerous. I'm Beth Hartwell. I'm here to bring you home. She knelt slowly beside the workbench, keeping her movements gentle and non-threatening. The war is over, Samuel. You've been home for 2 years. You're safe. The men who could be saved were saved. Because of you. Because you held the line long enough for help to come. She reached out slowly and placed her hand over his, feeling the tremors that shook his entire body. You did everything you could. It's time to come home now. For several moments, Samuel stared at her with the confused desperation of a man caught between two realities. Then gradually, awareness crept back into his eyes. He looked around the workshop as though seeing it for the first time. Took in the half-finished furniture, the tools arranged on their hooks, the peaceful afternoon light streaming through the windows. Beth? His voice was hoarse, exhausted. Oh God, you saw. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. She helped him to his feet, noting how he swayed with exhaustion. Let's get you to the house. You need rest. As they walked slowly back to the main house, Samuel leaning heavily on her arm, Beth felt the weight of what she had undertaken. This wasn't just about nursing a man through physical recovery. This was about helping a soul find its way back from a darkness that threatened to consume it entirely. That evening, as Tom prepared supper, Samuel sat at the kitchen table staring into a cup of coffee that had long since grown cold. The episode had left him drained, hollow-eyed, and convinced more than ever that Beth should leave on the next stage. I told you I wasn't the man who wrote those letters, he said quietly. Now you've seen what I really am. I've seen a man fighting a war that ended years ago because he cares too much about the soldiers he couldn't save. Beth sat across from him, her hands folded calmly on the table. That tells me more about your character than any letter ever could. You can't want to marry someone who might lose his mind without warning. Samuel, let me ask you something. If you met a soldier who had been wounded in battle, shot or stabbed, would you tell him he was worthless because he carried scars? Of course not. Then why is a wound to the mind any different from a wound to the body? She leaned forward, her green eyes intense with conviction. You served your country with honor. You saved lives. You've carried the weight of decisions that no one should have to make. The fact that your mind sometimes struggles to process all that trauma doesn't make you less of a man. It makes you human. Samuel was quiet for a long time, absorbing her words. When he finally looked up, there was something in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Not hope exactly, but the faintest possibility that hope might someday return. The episodes. They're getting worse, more frequent. Then we'll find ways to manage them. Together. You keep saying that word. Together. As if you really mean to stay. Beth reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses from years of hard work. The fine tremor that spoke of battles still being fought. Samuel Morrison, I came to Nevada to marry you. Nothing I've seen has changed my mind about that. The only question is whether you still want me as your wife. For the first time since her arrival, Samuel's lips curved in what might have been the beginning of a smile. I want that more than I've wanted anything in years. I'm just not sure I deserve it. Deserve it or not, Beth said firmly. You've got it. Now when shall we have the wedding? The wedding was held on a Sunday morning in late September, with the desert air crisp and clean and the mountains painted gold by the rising sun. Pastor Williams had ridden out from Silver Creek, along with a handful of townspeople who had known Tom Morrison for years and were curious about his son's mail-order bride. Beth wore her best dress, a simple blue gown she had made herself, with careful stitching and modest lace at the collar. She had no family to give her away, no childhood friends to serve as bridesmaids, but Tom Morrison offered his arm with the solemnity of a father walking his own daughter down the aisle. Samuel stood waiting on the front porch of the ranch house, dressed in his best suit and looking more composed than he had since her arrival. The tremor in his hands was barely noticeable, and his eyes, while still shadowed with old pain, held a clarity that gave Beth hope for their future. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. Pastor Williams spoke of the sacred bond between husband and wife, the importance of standing together through all of life's trials. When the time came for vows, Samuel's voice was steady and sure. I, Samuel Morrison, take you, Elizabeth Hartwell, to be my wife. I promise to honor you, protect you, and stand by you through whatever comes. I can't promise to be the husband you deserve, but I promise to try every day to become the man you believe I can be. Beth's own voice was clear and strong. I, Elizabeth Hartwell, take you, Samuel Morrison, to be my husband. I promise to love you, support you, and believe in you even when you can't believe in yourself. Whatever battles you still fight, you won't fight them alone. As Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Samuel lifted Beth's hands to his lips and kissed them gently. The gesture was formal, respectful, but Beth saw something in his eyes that made her heart flutter with unexpected emotion. Not love, not yet, but the possibility of love growing between two people willing to be vulnerable with each other. The wedding breakfast was a simple affair, but the neighboring ranchers who attended seemed genuinely pleased to welcome Beth into their community. Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, offered advice about desert gardening. Young Doc Brennan mentioned that he would be glad to help if Samuel's condition required medical attention. Even the reserved Sheriff Knox smiled and wished them well. But it was the quiet moment after the guests had departed, when Beth and Samuel found themselves alone on their front porch watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of crimson and gold, that felt like the real beginning of their marriage. Any regrets yet? Samuel asked, echoing his earlier doubts, but with less desperation in his voice. None, Beth replied honestly, though I confess I'm nervous about tonight. Samuel turned to look at her, understanding immediately what she meant. They were married now, but they were still strangers in many ways. The physical intimacy that marriage implied would require trust and patience from both of them. Beth, I want you to know that nothing has to happen tonight that you're not ready for. This marriage, I know it's not like what you might have expected. We can take things slowly, let them develop naturally. His consideration touched her deeply. And what about what you need? What you want? Samuel was quiet for a moment, his weathered hands gripping the porch railing. "What I want is to be the kind of husband who deserves a wife like you. What I need is time to figure out how to be that man." "Then that's what we'll do," Beth said simply. "Take the time we need to build something real between us." That night they slept in separate rooms. Samuel in the master bedroom, Beth in the guest room that Tom had prepared for her. But before retiring, Samuel had walked her to her door with old-fashioned courtesy, kissed her hand once more, and thanked her for the faith she was showing in him. As Beth lay in her narrow bed, listening to the desert wind whistle around the house and the distant sound of cattle moving in the pastures, she reflected on the strange turns her life had taken. A year ago, she had been a lonely seamstress in Chicago, with no family and few prospects. Now she was Mrs. Samuel Morrison, mistress of a substantial ranch, married to a man whose wounds ran deeper than anything she had imagined, but whose fundamental goodness shone through even his darkest moments. It wasn't the fairy tale romance she had dreamed of as a girl, but it was something perhaps more valuable, a partnership built on mutual respect and shared commitment to healing. If love came eventually, it would be earned rather than assumed, chosen rather than expected. From the next room, she could hear Samuel moving restlessly, probably fighting the insomnia that plagued him most nights. Tomorrow, she decided she would ask him about his dreams, his fears, his hopes for their future together. They had a lifetime to learn each other's stories, and she intended to prove that some wounds could indeed be healed with patience, understanding, and the steady presence of someone who refused to give up. Outside, the Nevada stars burned bright and clear in the desert sky, witnessing the beginning of something neither Beth nor Samuel could yet name, but both were willing to fight for. 2 months into their marriage, Beth had established routines that seemed to help Samuel manage his condition. She learned to recognize the signs of approaching episodes, the way his hands would start trembling more noticeably, how he would become increasingly withdrawn, the haunted expression that would creep into his eyes when memories pressed too close to the surface. Most days were good. Samuel worked alongside the ranch hands during the day, his natural leadership reasserting itself when he was focused on practical tasks. Evenings were spent quietly, Beth reading aloud while Samuel worked on small carpentry projects or both of them planning improvements to the ranch. They were building something together, slowly but steadily, and Beth had begun to believe that love might indeed grow from the foundation of trust they were creating. Then came the night that changed everything. Beth woke to the sound of screaming, raw, anguished cries that seemed to tear through the darkness like physical wounds. She threw on her robe and rushed to Samuel's room, finding him thrashing in his bed, caught in a nightmare so vivid that sweat poured down his face despite the cool desert air. "Samuel." She shook his shoulder gently, trying to wake him without startling him into violence. "It's Beth, you're safe. You're home." His eyes opened, but they weren't seeing her. They were seeing something from 15 years ago, something that had haunted his sleep for longer than she had known him. In one fluid motion, he lunged from the bed and grabbed her by the shoulders, his grip painful in its intensity. "Where are the reinforcements?" he demanded, his voice desperate. "You said they were coming." "My men are dying out there." "Samuel, please, you're hurting me." But he wasn't hearing her. In his mind, she was someone else entirely. Perhaps an officer who had made promises he couldn't keep. Perhaps an enemy trying to deceive him. His hands tightened on her arms, and Beth saw something in his eyes that frightened her more than his confusion. A cold calculation, as if he was deciding whether she represented a threat to his men. "Samuel Morrison," she said as loudly and clearly as she could. "Captain Morrison, stand down." "That's an order." The command in her voice seemed to penetrate his delusion. His grip loosened slightly, confusion replacing the military focus in his expression. "Orders? From who? You're not military." His voice trailed off as reality began seeping back in. He looked down at his hands gripping her arms, saw the fear in her eyes, and released her so suddenly that she stumbled backward. "Oh God," he whispered, staring at his hands as though they belonged to someone else. "Beth, did I hurt you?" Beth rubbed her arms where his fingers had gripped her, feeling the bruises that were already forming. The physical pain was nothing compared to the anguish in his voice, the horror in his eyes as he realized what he had done. "I'm all right," she said, though her voice shook slightly. "You didn't mean to. I could have killed you." Samuel backed away from her, his face pale with shock and self-loathing. In my mind, I thought you were someone else, someone dangerous. If you hadn't snapped me out of it. He sank into the chair beside his bed, his head in his hands, his whole body trembling with the aftermath of the episode. This is why you should leave, Beth. This is why I tried to warn you away. I'm not safe to be around. Beth stood in the doorway, her arms aching and her heart breaking for the man who was torturing himself with guilt over something he couldn't control. Every rational part of her mind was screaming that he was right, that she should pack her bags and return to the safety of her old life. But looking at him hunched in that chair, consumed with shame and self-hatred, she knew she couldn't abandon him now. Samuel, she said quietly, look at me. He raised his head reluctantly, his dark eyes filled with anguish. You didn't hurt me on purpose. You were caught in a nightmare, reliving trauma that would break most men completely. When I called your name and gave you a direct order, you stopped immediately. That tells me that somewhere, even in the worst of it, you knew right from wrong. But what if next time? Then we'll deal with next time when it comes. Samuel, do you think I'm some fragile flower who bruises at the first touch of difficulty? She moved closer, though she noticed he tensed when she approached. I knew what I was taking on when I married you. Not the details perhaps, but I knew you were wounded in ways that might never fully heal. I'm not going anywhere. Samuel studied her face as though trying to memorize every detail. You should be afraid of me. I'm not afraid of you, she replied firmly. I'm afraid for you. There's a difference. She knelt beside his chair, carefully not touching him, but close enough that he could see the sincerity in her eyes. Samuel, we're going to figure this out. We'll talk to Doc Brennan about treatments, maybe find ways to prevent these episodes or make them less intense. But we're going to figure it out together. And if we can't, what if I really do hurt you someday? Beth was quiet for a moment, considering her answer carefully. Then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But I won't leave you to fight this battle alone. And I won't let you convince yourself that you're a monster. You're not. You're a good man dealing with invisible wounds. And you deserve someone who believes in your worth even when you can't see it yourself. For the rest of that night, they sat together in Samuel's room, not touching, but present for each other in a way that went deeper than physical comfort. As dawn broke over the desert, Samuel finally spoke again. I don't deserve you, Beth. Maybe not, she replied with a small smile, but you're stuck with me anyway. And despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the bruises on her arms that would take days to fade, Beth meant every word. The incident marked a turning point in their marriage, though not in the way Beth had expected. Rather than driving them apart, the crisis forced them to confront the reality of Samuel's condition head-on and find practical ways to manage it together. Doc Brennan, when consulted, was more helpful than either of them had hoped. He had treated other veterans with similar symptoms and suggested several strategies, ensuring Samuel got regular, exhausting physical exercise during the day to help him sleep more deeply, avoiding alcohol entirely, as it seemed to make episodes more severe, and establishing calming routines before bedtime that might help keep nightmares at bay. Most importantly, he helped them understand that Samuel's condition wasn't a moral failing or a sign of weakness. It was an injury, as real as a broken bone, that required patience and proper treatment to heal. The mind is like any other part of the body, Doc Brennan explained during one of his visits to the ranch. When it's been subjected to severe trauma, it develops ways of protecting itself that aren't always healthy in peacetime. Samuel's nightmares and episodes are his mind's way of trying to process experiences that were too overwhelming to fully understand when they happened. Will they ever stop completely? Beth asked. That's hard to say, but they can become less frequent and less severe with the right approach. The key is consistency, understanding, and, if you'll forgive me saying so, the kind of unwavering support you've been providing. Over the following months, Beth and Samuel developed their own methods for dealing with his condition. She learned to sleep lightly, able to wake at the first signs of his distress. When nightmares came, she would speak to him calmly and firmly, using his military rank and direct commands that seemed to penetrate his confused state more effectively than gentle coaxing. More importantly, they began talking, really talking about the war, about the men he had lost, about the guilt that ate at him during his darkest moments. Beth listened without judgment, asking questions that helped him process memories he had been carrying alone for too long. Tell me about Private Harrison, she said one evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. You mentioned him yesterday. Samuel was quiet for a long moment, his hands working steadily on a small wooden horse he was carving. Billy Harrison, 17 years old, lied about his age to enlist. Reminded me of my younger brother. Same freckles, same enthusiasm for everything. His voice grew heavy. He was one of the ones who didn't make it out of that last battle. What was he like? Funny. Could make the whole company laugh even when we were cold, hungry, and scared. He used to write letters to a girl back home, Sarah something, and he'd read them aloud sometimes when he got her responses. We all knew about her cat, her grandmother's apple pie, her plans for their wedding after the war. Did she know what happened to him? Samuel nodded slowly. I wrote to her myself. Told her what a good soldier he'd been, how much the men respected him. Didn't tell her he died calling her name, asking me to make sure she knew he loved her. Beth felt tears pricking her eyes, not just for Billy Harrison and his Sarah, but for Samuel, who had carried these intimate details of loss for so many years without anyone to share them with. You gave his last words to someone who needed to hear them, she said gently. That was a gift, was it? Or was I just making her grief worse by giving her details she didn't need? Samuel, if you died tomorrow, God forbid, and someone came to tell me your last words were of love for me, would that make my grief worse, or would it be something precious to hold on to? He considered this, his hands still working the wood with automatic skill. I suppose it would mean everything to know that. Then you did the right thing. For Billy, for Sarah, and for every other family you wrote to. These conversations, painful as they often were, seemed to help Samuel more than any medicine Doc Brennan could prescribe. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but they became less frequent. The episodes of confusion still occurred, but they were shorter and less violent. More importantly, Samuel began to believe that he might someday be worthy of the love Beth was offering him. It was on their 6-month anniversary that he finally kissed her. Not the formal, respectful kisses he had given her at their wedding, but a real kiss, full of tenderness and the promise of deeper intimacy to come. I love you, Beth, he said afterward, his forehead resting against hers. I don't know when it happened or how you managed to see past all my damage to find something worth loving. But I do love you. I love you too, she replied, feeling the truth of it settle into her bones like a homecoming, damage and all. That night, for the first time since their wedding, they shared the same bed. Their lovemaking was gentle, tentative, full of questions and reassurances. But it was real. Two wounded souls finding healing in each other's arms. Two lonely people discovering that love could indeed grow from the foundation of trust and commitment. As Beth lay beside her sleeping husband, listening to his steady breathing and marveling at the peace on his face, she reflected on the journey that had brought them both to this moment. She had come to Nevada looking for security and belonging. Instead, she had found something far more precious, the chance to love someone not despite his flaws, but because of the courage and goodness those flaws couldn't diminish. Samuel stirred beside her, and she tensed slightly, ready to wake him if another nightmare began, but instead he simply reached for her in his sleep, pulling her closer with a contented sigh. For the first time in months, he slept peacefully through the night. Outside their window, the Nevada desert stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, witnessing the quiet miracle of two broken souls learning to heal together, not by forgetting their wounds, but by refusing to let those wounds define their worth or limit their capacity for love. In the morning, they would wake as husband and wife in truth, ready to face whatever challenges their future might hold. Together,